What you do is infinitely more important than how you do it. Efficiency is still important, but it is useless unless applied to the right things. Being busy is most often used as a guise for avoiding the few critically important but uncomfortable actions.
Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
This episode is brought to you by Exercise Science LLC, your one-stop shop for all of your exercise needs. Exercise Science, a high-intensity strength training studio based out of New Orleans, is owned and run by exercise physiologist and Body by Science contributor Ryan Hall. Ryan has been featured on a podcast twice, and both are among my most popular episodes of all time. Exercise Science LLC have the expertise, experience, and the tools to maximize physical strength, improve performance, and functional capacity in just 12 minutes per session. I'm a big fan of Ryan, and if I were living in New Orleans, I would seriously sign up in a heartbeat. To book a consultation, go to corporatewarrior.co/Ryan and submit your information on the contact form. So again, head on over to corporatewarrior.co/Ryan and fill in the contact form to book a consultation now. This podcast is brought to you by HitUni.com. HitUni.com are a provider of amazing online courses for high-intensity training qualifications. HitUni comes highly recommended by the best in the field, including Body by Science co-author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carlson, and trainer and founder of Bay.com, Drew Bay. It was founded by my friend, author, and longtime personal trainer Simon Shawcross, who's also been a guest on the podcast. Simon has 15 years experience training clients and has supervised over 15,000 high-intensity training workouts. Using knowledge from experts like Skylar Tanner, Dr. James Steele, Dr. Ellington Darden, HitUni is a goldmine for learning everything to do with high-intensity training. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace. There's online support and a discussion forum where you can share ideas and ask for help. To learn more about high-intensity training and improve my own results, I started their personal trainer course. The content is amazing, the courses are really easy to follow, and each section is organized into bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement after you complete each one. I should also mention there is a DIY course, so this is the course for you if you're not necessarily a personal trainer, but you want to learn more about high-intensity training and how to implement it for maximum benefit in your own exercise regime. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's HITUNI.com, and enter the coupon code CW10, that's CW and the number 10. So again, head on over to hituni.com, pick your course, and enter the coupon code CW10 for 10% discount. Thank you for your support. Hi guys, I am Lawrence Neal and welcome to another episode of Corporate Warrior. Quick update, schedule the fun. I've been overworking myself recently and I've not been making time for fun and relaxation. England were in the World Cup qualifiers recently for football, so if you're in the US, that's soccer. And so I decided to schedule some time to catch up on the games. And I just realised how important it is to make time for fun and relaxation. So take it from me, if you're a type A, super driven person and prone to be a workaholic, schedule the fun ahead of time. This podcast teaches you how to optimize your high-intensity training protocol and your high-intensity training business to help you achieve your health, fitness, and business goals. I've interviewed many of the top experts in high-intensity training, HIIT business, and related fields, including Rob Wolf, Ben Greenfield, Brad Schoenfeld, Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, Ryan Hall, Dr. Jeremy Lenicky, Gary Torbs, Mark Sisson, and many, many more. I have no guests today, so on this episode I'll be showing you how to be more productive in your business and or your job, and how to 10x your per hour output and give you the time and energy to build that high intensity training business or side hustle, be it a high intensity training studio or blog or YouTube channel, etc., etc. This is a detailed overview of the productivity principles explored in the 4-Hour Workweek and exactly how I implemented them in my career in IT sales, which afforded me the opportunity to grow my own podcast and eventually transition to running Corporate Warrior full-time. I think the 4-hour work week can be very abstract to some people. It certainly was to me. I was always looking for a decent example of where I could apply it in my IT sales career, and I couldn't find one. So I've decided to create a resource for you here. So this is in the context of how I implemented the 4-hour work week principles in IT sales. However, this need not only be relevant to that discipline and can be applied to any job or business. If you are really interested in becoming more productive, significantly increasing revenue, and making time for the most important things in life, then I think you will really enjoy this. I talk about how to become truly effective, how to implement 80-20 thinking, how to use Parkinson's Law to get more done in less time, and how to combine all 3 of these tactics for maximal productivity. For all the show notes and links for this episode and all episodes, please go to corporatewarrior.org. And don't forget to hang around at the end to find out how you can get free podcast transcripts and my weekly emails. And now I give you yours truly on how to implement the 4-hour work week into your job or business. Hi guys, very excited to bring you this episode. I was a little bit scared to publish this for various reasons. But the purpose of this episode is to provide you with the means to implement the 4-hour work week principles, which is a book written by Tim Ferriss, in your job or your business. And I'm going to show you how I did that in my IT sales career before I moved to Ireland. So I left a career in IT sales about 4 months ago, and I'm going to show you how I implemented the principles in that career, and then how I've also done it in my podcast as well. So what is the 4-hour work week? The 4-hour work week is a New York Times best-selling book by Tim Ferriss. He also went on to write The 4-Hour Body, The 4-Hour Chef. He's got a very successful blog. He's a successful investor. He's someone who produces great content. I probably visit Tim's blog almost every day to learn more about how I can be more productive and learn the things that I want to learn to improve different aspects of my life. So just a quick story around, what the 4-hour work week is based on. So Tim uses strategies to explore within the 4-hour work week to reduce his working week for his athletic supplement business. So he was going for a stage where he was working stupid hours, like 100-hour weeks, and he was making a lot of money, but he was just very depressed and not really enjoying life very much. So he basically completely revisited the principles of productivity and used that to restructure his business. So it went from him working, as I said, 100 hours per week. I might be exaggerating there, but a lot of hours per week, reducing it down to 2 hours per week. And at the same time, I believe he increased his revenue from somewhere like $40,000 per month to $80,000. And this is a small business. I mean, it's pretty much just Tim, and I suppose he had a few contractors, but that's pretty high margin from what I understand. So it's very, very attractive and impressive. Now, I know you might hear that and think, what a load of rubbish. There's no way that that's even possible. Like, how could you do that? And I know it sounds crazy. And it's like, how could you possibly run a business of 2 hours per week? But when you really get into the details of how he did it, the principles he used and the strategies and tactics, it does become somewhat more believable. Tim was able to do it through using things like 80-20 analysis, outsourcing, automation, empowering others, and much more than that. But those are kind of the broad strokes that enabled him to achieve that. And I'll be exploring that in this. So the purpose of the book, The 4-Hour Work Week, is really twofold. It's either, I suppose, if you want to have a 2-hour work week or 4-hour work week, then Tim gives you the tools and the principles to do that. But the other side of it is increasing your per hour output by 10 times. So 10xing your per hour output. So the principles in the book and the things I'll be elaborating on this, you can use in a number of different settings. So if you're running a existing high intensity training business and you want to significantly increase your revenue or productivity, then you'll be able to use that there. Or if you're in a job and you want to create time and energy to build a high intensity training business on the side, maybe a studio, maybe a blog or YouTube channel or something like that, then this will give you the time and energy to do that, as you'll be able to complete the sort of most critical tasks in your job in much less time. Or actually, the third circumstance is if you are in a job that you just love and you want to really significantly increase your productivity and output in that job, then this also applies. So that is the different scenarios where this is applicable. So as I was saying, 4-hour work week, very abstract. I think a lot of people, and certainly I, struggled with trying to learn how I could actually implement it in my workplace or in my business. I'm a sort of person, sometimes I need people to really spell things out for me. I need really good examples and analogies to understand how principles apply. I was looking for that. So when I was in IT sales, I was looking all over the web for people that had actually taken the principles from the book and actually implemented it in that discipline. And I couldn't find it anywhere. Obviously, it's a very niche thing to ask for, to expect that someone's taken that book and then, provided a resource on how they did it in that discipline. That's, a big ask. But I thought, well, there's probably people out there like me who perhaps want to find an example of where someone's done that in IT sales. But that being said, I don't want that to put you off if you're not in that discipline, because these principles really do apply across any setting, any position you might be in, be it a job or business or in any discipline. So I think by giving you an IT sales context, it will bring a lot of the principles to life and they'll make more sense to you. So just to set the scene, I used to work many hours in IT sales before I understood how to be more productive. And then in my last, I'd say, 6 to 12 months, I was able to achieve and get my critical work done within the first 2 hours of the day. So by 11 a.m., I pretty much had the most important stuff done that I had to do that day. So that means that even if I didn't get a lot more done after 11 a.m., it really didn't make much of a difference. So in my final year with my employer, I was top salesperson, and there was a pretty big margin between myself and second place. I closed multiple £1 million contracts in B2B IT sales. And I was actually effectively doing less than I was previously, where I was kind of running around like a busy fool trying to get everything done. So I had quite a lot of success implementing the principles I learned from the 4-hour work week and various other productivity resources. So I'm going to show you exactly how I implemented that. And I'm going to tell you, that not everything worked. Not everything that Tim says to do, I did. And some of the stuff I did and tried failed and I had to discard it. But that's the whole point with all this. It's like anyone who listens to my podcast, you shouldn't just take anything on faith that anyone says. You should test it in your own life and figure out what works for you. Keep what's useful, discard what isn't, and create what is uniquely your own. I've completely butchered that, but I think Bruce Lee said that. So that's very much the approach that I try and take. And I think anyone who listens to the podcast should be taking that type of approach. So firstly, you need to figure out what your goal is. So I think goals are really important because goals kind of help inform your actions and your strategy and everything else that follows. So I knew I wanted to have my own business. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I had Corporate Warrior going on the side, and it was making some revenue, but I really wanted to just focus on it full time. So I kind of made that my goal, and I knew I wanted to earn a certain amount of money to make that possible before then eventually transitioning over. There's a fantastic chapter on this in the 4-hour work week called Fear Setting. I believe it's called Fear Setting, or the section's called Fear Setting. And it essentially asks you to define the fears of quitting your job. How would you repair the damage temporarily if needed? And then you got to weigh that up against the benefits of quitting that job. What does the lifestyle does that afford you? And by doing that exercise, it's so compelling because you quickly realize, it's not maybe as scary as I once thought. And wow, look at all this upside. And I think if we don't do exercises like that, instead we make snap judgments or snap decisions where we're like, oh no, that's far too risky. I couldn't possibly do that. So do check that out. as a really, really useful exercise. So then just carrying on from what I was saying just now. So then the goal became, for me, maximizing earnings to mean that I could transition to doing corporate warrior full time and have some savings if needed. However, as many of you know, this was very expedited by my sudden move to Ireland. My partner and I made a decision to come to Ireland for various reasons. But this was a very welcoming event because there was a number of reasons that made it very attractive to me. I was happy to leave London. I'd been living in London for a while and it kind of started stressing me out a bit too much. And I was quite happy to move to a kind of a more rural, suburban place to live. And at the same time, my cost of living went through the floor. So this was great because it means that the money I'd saved was worth a lot more. And it meant that starting a business or trying to grow my business was much easier. So anyway, getting back to goals, it's really important to do the hard thinking up front, to figure out what it is you want and what tasks and actions you need to do to get there. So this is all about prioritizing. And there's a section of 4 Hour Workweek called Dreamlining, which is fantastic, which is where Tim shows you how to figure out, what it is you want to be, do, and have, and then figure out the cash flow required to get there. And then that kind of dictates the rest of your strategy. Again, this is just one way of setting goals. There's plenty of different goal setting strategies out there. I just think you need to pick one that works for you. So I'm going to kind of go over some various principles before I get into the meat of how I implemented the 4 Hour Workweek in my job, because I think it's important just to give you an understanding of what's required and what's needed. So obviously, in the context of IT sales, you have to become a good salesperson. So you need to be competent. You can be the most productive person in the world, but if you're not good at your job, then I don't think you're going to be very successful. So if you're in sales, make sure you understand how to qualify your opportunities with your prospects. So there's a acronym called BANT, which stands for Budget, Authority, Need, Timescale, which are kind of the core criteria that you need to get from your prospects and customers when qualifying new opportunities for sales. And one thing I learned, and something that really set me apart, was my thoroughness and my rigor in my questioning. So I made it conversational, but I had a very, very well-structured, well-prepared line of questions that I asked every single client and prospect, which was really win-win because, number one, I got all the information I needed to make sure that I knew whether it was a good prospect or a bad prospect and whether it was a good fit for either of us. So from that point of view, it's very win-win because if it's not good, I can tell them that and I can tell them why, and they don't waste time, I don't waste time, and we can move on. Or alternatively, if it is a good fit, then I've probably asked more questions and have more information and more knowledge about them than my competitors, and I'm far more likely to win the deal. There's an amazing book on this, which is probably the best book I've read on this specific part of sales. And I've read a lot of books on sales, and it's called Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. And I'll link to that in the show notes. I can't remember the author's name off the top of my head. So just to add to that, I'd also do a lot of pre-meeting research. So I'd prepare questions in advance and I would make sure I read the client's website. I would try and understand their services and products, their objectives, their challenges. I'd even try and find their public accounts and finances and stuff like that. So I'd go into meetings with all of this prep done. And just to know, I also had a checklist of exactly what I needed to cover prior to meeting a client. So there wasn't a lot of brain power used to do this because I'd already kind of predefined what I was going to look for in preparation. So when I would go through this line of questioning with this client and show them what I know already, I just instantly separated myself from the competition. And I believe if you do that, you're going to be ahead of 99% of the salespeople out there, because most salespeople are just lazy. They're lazy and they don't have the critical thinking skills to really execute on this stuff. So bottom line is, become competent in your discipline. So I've just given you what I think are the kind of core competencies in sales, but obviously this is different in each profession. Right, so now I'm going to run through the principles of productivity. So the first one is effectiveness. And this is probably the most important principle of all. So Peter Drucker, a famous management theorist, wrote a book called The Effective Executive, which is amazing. I was in Mexico and I read this on holiday, and it took me an entire 2 weeks to read it because I had to reread like each page like 5 times before it sunk in. But that's probably just my own shortcomings. But it is an excellent book, and Tim Ferriss distills a lot of the core principles in that in the 4-Hour Work Week. Now we have effectiveness and we have efficiency. Lots of people are good at being efficient, that's doing things well. But most, in fact, almost all of them are really bad at being effective. That's choosing the right things to do. Now, I can say that because in every company I've worked for, I'm surrounded by people that are just ineffective. They're just not choosing the right activities. They end up doing things that aren't productive, that really don't have a high impact. And what's worse, they quite often ask people to help with that work or reel other people in and waste other people's time. So what is effective? Normally, effective means uncomfortable, hard, and can take quite a lot of energy. Not always, but it's typically the stuff that we almost try to avoid because it's scary or it's just hard and difficult to tackle. So I'm going to repeat a number of lines straight out of 4-Hour Work Week that are so important and were so impressionable on me. And this is how you need to think about effectiveness. And I'm hoping this will resonate with you as much as it did with me. What you do is infinitely more important than how you do it. Efficiency is still important, but it is useless unless applied to the right things. Being busy is most often used as a guise for avoiding the few critically important but uncomfortable actions. Being overwhelmed is often as unproductive as doing nothing and is far more unpleasant. Being selective, doing less, is the path of the productive. Focus on the important few and ignore the rest. Slow down and remember, most things make no difference. Being busy is a form of laziness, lazy thinking and indiscriminate action. It's easy to get caught up in the minutiae. The key to not feeling rushed is remembering that lack of time is actually lack of priorities. So I've repeated these and reread these multiple times, probably hundreds of times, just to really ingrain these principles into my head whenever I'm trying to make decisions or getting overwhelmed. I find myself, some days, and I still make mistakes now, and some days I am overwhelmed with stuff, and I think to myself, you know what, why do I feel overwhelmed? Because a lot of these tasks really don't make that much of a difference anyway. So it's difficult because in today's culture, especially in kind of the cities and the corporate culture, there's a lot of emphasis on being busy just for the sake of it. It's kind of ingrained in our culture, and people have to have this sense of doing stuff, of being productive, and not really thinking about it. Richard Koch, who's the author of the 80-20 Principle, which I think is the book that really inspired a lot of the 4-Hour Work Week, elaborates on some of this. He says that productivity is not related to hours and value is not related to time. And when you're working really, really hard, you often stop thinking. And a hard-working person is often too busy to spot what is really important. So that's some really key stuff to think about when you find yourself in the flurry of hard work and you're just kind of doing stuff for the sake of it. Might actually pay you dividends to step back and go, why am I doing this? Is this getting me closer to my goal? Is there something more important I should be doing? So in summary, the way you implement this is you really just pick 1 or 2 to-dos for that day, and you block out the first 2 to 3 hours of your day to do those things, and you complete them one by one. So no multitasking, just monotasking here. If those to-dos are high impact and you've done the hard thinking and you've kind of qualified them down as the key things to do, it is not necessary to have more than 2. And if you're stuck trying to decide between multiple items that all seem critical, look at each item in turn and ask yourself, if this is the only thing I accomplished today, will I be satisfied with my day? And we'll be talking about the 80-20 principles next to help you select tasks. So what is the 80-20 principle, or otherwise known as the Pareto law? So it's a law of economics, which basically states that 80% of your output comes from 20% of the inputs. This was established by a chap called Vilfredo Pareto, hopefully I've said his name correctly, who discovered that of all the pea pods in his garden, that only 20% of the pea pods produced 80% of the peas. And he started seeing this pattern occur in loads of different settings. So, for example, he saw that 80% of the wealth was accumulated by 20% of the population, and so on. And this phenomenon can be found everywhere. And I encourage you to read the 80-20 principle by Richard Koch for a real in-depth analysis of the 80-20 principle. So it's really easy to identify this in business, and it's normally skewed to even more to 90-10 or 95-5, especially with the likes of market share for some of the internet behemoths like Facebook and Google, where network effects are in play. And network effects are when a platform's value grows in proportion to the number of users that come onto the platform. You can also see the 80-20 play itself out in loads of different aspects of business. So, for example, 20% of the salespeople bring in 80% of the revenue, 20% of the marketing activities bring in 80% of the leads, and 80% of the web traffic comes from 20% of the sources. However, before you can understand what does deliver the most value and what holds the most weight, you have to separate the wheat from the chaff in your job or in your business. So you must eliminate activities in the new position or in the new business. So to do that, you need to throw up a lot of stuff on the wall and see what sticks. And that's all part of the process. And that should take you no more than a month or two. And in that time, you should figure out, what are the items and activities that are a waste of time, and what are the things that are giving me 80% of my output. For example, with this podcast, I realized quite recently that I'm not that much more productive than I was when I was doing this on the side when I was working full time. So when I worked in London, I had a fairly good income that enabled me to outsource a lot of the blog post work and audio production, and just meant that I could focus on doing the interviews and recording introductions and things like that. Since moving to Ireland, I had to bring a lot of the other stuff in-house. So I'm spending a lot of time editing and producing blog content and still doing the same number of interviews. So the impact is not that much greater. And a lot of the other stuff that I probably do in my day and some of the social media stuff probably isn't that much productive at all. So with that in mind, I identified that 20%, which is publishing interviews and that kind of thing, and replicated that. So hence why I'm trying now to do 2 episodes per week. The next principle I want to explore is Parkinson's Law. Parkinson's Law is the adage that work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. So the way we can implement this is by reducing allowed hours on a task to its seemingly impossible deadlines to cut out the fluff and focus on the essentials. So to summarize those 3, you've got being effective, 80-20 principle, and Parkinson's Law. So you can only imagine when you combine all of these 3, you will have a dramatic impact on your productivity. So last principle I want to touch on before talking to you about how to implement this stuff in practice is batching. Batching is a solution to your distracting but necessary time consumers. Those repetitive tasks that are important to get done, but they interrupt the most important tasks. And these include things like email, general administration, phone calls, payments, etc. So if you do these things ad hoc and in pieces and in kind of piecemeal, they will cost you more time, attention, and money. In the 4-Hour Workweek, Tim uses the example of, I believe, printing t-shirts. So every time you do a t-shirt print, there is a setup cost of, say, $200, just for argument's sake. And regardless of whether you're printing 5 t-shirts or 20 t-shirts, the setup cost is the same. So it makes sense to wait until you've got a critical mass rather than printing small increments of t-shirts and paying that setup fee every single time. So what we want to do with these repetitive tasks is improve our efficiency at doing them. And that will save time, attention, and money by batching them together and then scheduling them as infrequently as possible, or as infrequently as it makes sense to. So, for example, email, I don't think anyone should be checking that all the time if they want to be productive. It should be scheduled in blocks of time where you are in that hour or 2 hours solely focused on processing email, and then once that time is complete, you're off it. And you could also use this concept for your in-trays. So some of you might be familiar with the book Getting Things Done by David Allen, where he teaches the concept of an in-tray, which is basically a list or place where you can put thoughts, write thoughts down or put thoughts into whenever you have them, as opposed to trying to store them in your brain. And obviously, if you've got a whole to-do list of things, again, the same principle applies. It doesn't make sense to be diving in and out of that list, doing things ad hoc. It makes more sense to batch it in one go and process all of those items at once. So that's batching, and now I'm going to go into how to implement all of these principles in practice and how exactly I did that in my IT sales career. So the first thing I'll talk about is I used 80/20 to identify the time-wasting activities and make time for the things that I identify as force multipliers. So the time-wasting stuff that I identified included email, customer service issues, interruptions like chatting with colleagues and unnecessary phone calls, pointless internal and external meetings, low yield opportunities, poorly qualified opportunities, high maintenance customers, and things like in my personal life, like lack of sleep, my personal mobile interrupting work, website distractions, and then going back to work, unproductive disagreements with my managers. And then I identified the 20% of things that were causing 80% of my desired outcomes and happiness in my work. And that included working on high yield, high probability, well-qualified deals, having occasional pep talks with my mentors. There was a chap I worked with called Peter Bodley Scott, who was one of the founders of a company that was acquired by my former employer, who was a great business person and just great mentor. And then lastly, I really enjoyed meetings with senior salespeople and directors and seeing them in front of customers and learning from them. So those were the activities that had the biggest benefit on me. So this process and how to identify the time-wasting activities and the force multipliers is all outlined in the 4-Hour Workweek. So once I did that, I then decided, okay, what am I going to eliminate? What 4/5 of activities am I going to eliminate if I had a gun to my head? So I just wrote this list down. Obviously, this is just an exercise. It's not necessarily what you're definitely going to do, but it's a useful exercise all the same. So I decided I would eliminate checking email unless it was related to a key deal. I would eliminate meetings, no customer, internal, off-site training meetings. I would eliminate doing my expenses, forecasting, updating CRM, my spreadsheet, much to the dismay of my boss at the time, sales activity updates, conversations with colleagues and existing customers, commuting, contact with low spending, high maintenance customers. Just to caveat that, I did obviously update my CRM if my previous managers are listening, but this was just an exercise to understand what stuff really wasn't contributing to my productivity. And then I figured out the top 3 activities that filled the time that made me feel productive but actually weren't. And again, that's checking and responding to email, planning and creating new spreadsheets to record progress and actions, and updating CRM. So I did that exercise, and that was really useful to me because it helped me identify, where should I be focusing my time. So then I'll now elaborate on more in terms of how I structured my day and how I made decisions to drive productivity. So with the commuting being an issue and the distractions in the office, I decided to try and work from home as often as possible. However, even though I found I was more productive, it would actually drive me insane to be working from home all the time, and I like to be surrounded by people. So I actually decided just to employ this twice per week. I then had a launch sequence to my day, which was the same exact checklist of things I did every morning before I went to work. So this went like this. Journaling. So any of you that are familiar with a 5-minute journal, which is a gratitude exercise and a way to set goals for the day, I would do that first. And then I'd have breakfast, and pretty much 90% of the time, it was just a 4-egg omelette. Simple as that. Fried in butter or coconut oil. Shower. Then I would get changed, and I would get changed into casual clothes. I'd commute to the office, which was a 40-minute London tube journey. I would buy a black coffee on the way into the office, and then I would change into my suit in the office, because I had all of my suits and shirts hung up in the office closet. So, and you might be thinking, why the fuck is he telling me about that? Why is that important? But it is really important, because it's all about eliminating decision fatigue. If you're waking up every day and you're thinking about, what do I want to do first? What am I going to have for breakfast? What am I going to wear? What coffee shall I have? Shall I have tea? All this type of stuff. You're using a limited resource on stuff that is trivial and not important. You should be saving and conserving your willpower and decision-making power for critical decisions that you're going to make later that day that are going to have a much bigger impact on your life. And there is some literature to support this, which I'll link to in the show notes. But essentially, if you can do this, it will give you more energy and more willpower to focus on being more productive in your job, and also giving you the time and energy to build your business or build that side hustle. And the same principle applied to lunch. So every day, I pretty much had the same thing. So I would pre-order a Chipotle salad bowl. At the time, I was doing sort of slow carb diet. So it was always like meat, veg, and salsa. And I would, I might have like a very small change in configuration. So I might have, pork rather than beef one day, but it's pretty much the same thing. So again, it's not an important decision. So I automated it and didn't have to think about it. My workspace was always completely tidy, or as much as often I try and make it tidy. If I came in and my workspace was a mess, it would just scramble my brain and lead to an unproductive day. So to that end, also, never arrive at your desk without a clear list of priorities. So before you finish work the previous day, write down your priorities. Talking about those principles we've already talked about in terms of effectiveness and 80-20, write down what is the most important 1 or 2 things you have to do that next day. This means you don't have to worry about it that morning. However, alternatively, if you're like me, and sometimes I just find I don't have the energy or the willpower to prioritize the previous evening, I will actually come in early, or I would have come in the office very early, and that's before everyone else gets there and starts distracting me, to identify what those priorities are. So when I start work, I already know what I need to do, and I don't get distracted by opening up email and start, responding to other people's agenda. So those are kind of the kind of launch sequence principles that I applied in my career, and I still apply to this day in my business. So I don't actually plan the previous night. I do kind of a review sometimes of my day to kind of identify what's working, what's not working, what's making me happy, what's making me unhappy, stuff like that. But what I tend to do now is I tend to wake up early, maybe 7 o'clock, and I journal, and then I use that time to prioritize. So the next step is on being effective, and how I identified what it meant to be effective in IT sales. So there's one line from the 4-Hour Workweek that really stood out for me in this context. And it was a sales lesson that Tim Ferriss had when he was in IT sales himself. So he said that his manager trained him to recognize when he was unfocused or focused on the wrong things, which meant anything that didn't move the top 2 or 3 clients one step closer to signing a purchase order. And that is absolutely critical. If you're in sales, that is the most important thing typically that you could focus on. So I identified what my goal was. So my goal my former employer was to achieve 30,300 margins, that's profit, first year margin per month. So that was my goal. So I needed to find opportunities that when closed would achieve that yield. So with that, I focused my first 2 to 3 hours of my day moving 1 or 2 opportunities closer to signing a purchase order. And I started with the most urgent, most near term, so deal that was likely to close most near term, high probability and high margin opportunities that I identified that morning or previous night. So there's no going into email, nothing like that. I'm just going, okay, what are those deals? What do they look like? And what are the things I need to do to move those forward? And yes, quite often that does mean going into email because that's how we all communicate these days. But the only reason I would go into email is to push those forward. I would not process any of the other mail unless it was absolutely urgent, like unless my boss was asking me for something urgently. And then I would do one at a time. So if I had 2 opportunities and an action for each, or maybe 1 opportunity and 2 actions for it, I would do 1 task at a time, no multitasking. So I had this pretty good pipeline and good account base that I had grown over time. And I was in a quite fortunate position because I'd identified a few opportunities that were perfect fit in terms of our profile customer at the time. And so I knew that they were important to focus on. And at the same time, I had done 80-20 analysis on my account base to figure out which accounts were spending the most and decided to focus on those. So going forward, my focus really was on those new prospects that I was bringing on as new business and as existing clients that were kind of the 20% that were generating 80% of the revenue. So that's where I would focus. And I just knew that there was no point in going to get new customers or trying to sell to my whole account base. I knew that that was a poor decision and would spread my focus too thin and would yield a worse result if I were to do that. So that's how I decided to focus. And I knew that even if I didn't generate a lot more new prospects for a long time, I had a lot of business within my existing customer base and in those I was bringing on board. So obviously I use 80-20 analysis to select the right opportunities within existing or new business. And also I wanted to make sure that I was focused on opportunity that was equal to 3 or 4 times my target. So if my target's 30,000 a month, I wanted there to be 120,000 pounds of first year profit worth of opportunity, and within that selection to reduce risk. And that's just something that we do in sales. Is you always want to have a pipeline, ideally that's a multiple of 2 or 3 or even 4 times your target, in case a deal drops through, which it can happen and often happens. So I'm going to give you an example of how so once I'd focused on selected the right opportunities, how did I know exactly what tasks to tackle within those opportunities? What were the actions that were going to move them closer to signing a purchase order? Now, obviously that's going to vary each time, and for every deal it's always different, and it's at different stages, and it should be quite clear to you what's next. And obviously the customer, there'll always be a next action agreed between you and the customer, or there should be. So quite often with the big complex deals, there was always something required. So always some next action the customer required from me to do. So that quite often might be some specific commercial detail, some product information, maybe setting up a sales meeting between a number of senior executives within my company and also the clients. Those are a few examples of the type of things that I would prioritize. And when I did that, I made sure I over-delivered, not too much, but as much as necessary on the action to increase the likelihood of closing the deal and to come across really well to the customer. So in summary, I would select 1 or 2 critical tasks or goals and set a time constraint. There's Parkinson's law in action. So I would set 2 hours or 2 to 3 hours, and I would literally just focus on 1 or 2 tasks, and I'd monotask. Never have more than 2 mission critical items per day, and I would use a small post-it folded 2 or 3 times to limit the size of the item. So I stole that concept from Tim Ferriss, or that tip I should say, and that's just a great way of, again, minimizing the to-dos but focusing on the most important things. And in terms of using Parkinson's law, which, as I've already explained, allows you to accomplish more in less time and shorten schedules and deadlines, you can use something like eggtimer.com, that's e.ggtimer.com, which enables you to use Parkinson's law on a micro-task level, and you can actually set a timer. So, for instance, let's say you crack on with your first critical to-dos at 9 a.m. You go into Eggtimer, you set it to 2 hours, and then you've literally got a browser that's timing you, it's counting down, making you ignore the fluff and focus on the essential things. And this would enable me to get my most important stuff done before 11 a.m. most days. And the next section is on batching. So here's how I would batch various tasks in my job. So email was the main thing. So I'll give that as an example that I had to batch. So I would switch off the auto receive that is enabled as default with Outlook, which is the worst thing ever. And I see this all the time. So people will be on their laptops or computers doing work, might be doing something important, and then a notification will come up in the bottom right. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be something completely, it could be spam. It could be just nonsense email, and they'll check it and to get distracted. And there's data to show that it's something like every time you're distracted, it takes on average 20 minutes to get back to your original task. So switch it off because it is not serving you. I checked email once or twice a day, typically 12 p.m. and 4 p.m. to allow for a bit of build up so that in those hours I had kind of the maximum amount of email that I would get that day, and then I'd process that, and I'd process that offline. So I would respond to every single email offline, so I didn't start some kind of instant messenger type interaction. Email is not instant messenger. It is not text like text or Facebook or whatever. In fact, email, my understanding is that email was originally invented for emergency military communication. So, that gives you an indication of why it might not be appropriate for instant messaging use. So process email offline to eliminate that. The other tool that Tim advocates is the autoresponder. And this is a touchy one because I can see how it can be really effective, but in my experience, it didn't go down that well. So essentially, an autoresponder is, if someone emails you, they get an autoresponder, they get an email back, which is automated, and it will say, typically people use it for when they go on annual leave. So say, I'm on annual leave between this date and this date, and I will respond to your email on my return, blah, blah, blah. But the way Tim uses it is he says you should say, I'm only checking email. Thank you for your email. I'm only checking email between this time and this time. This helps me to be more efficient and more effective at serving you, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's great. And I don't actually use it in my business. I may start to. Because I try and I'd probably check email a bit too much in my own business, and I need to become better at that. But I think this is a great concept, and I had a colleague of mine who tried it. We tried implementing it, and he tested it, and then quite quickly he was sort of brought into a meeting and told not to do that. And the feeling in the business was we don't want our customers to get the impression that they're not being served properly, and blah blah blah. And I respect that and understand that. I think it's a little bit short-sighted, and I think maybe it was felt that it was a bit too radical for the business. But like I was saying earlier, not everything that is preached in the 4-hour work week is going to be applicable and is going to be accepted. So you just have to try things out. You might try the autoresponder, and I know there's one example on Tim's blog where this one one person had tried it and had an email back from the CEO congratulating them on them using their initiative and being more productive. And, they said, I wish everyone in the organization would use this approach. So you never know, it might work for you. So the other way I tried to use batching was meetings. I tried to make, I think it was Wednesday and Thursday, my meeting days. And I tried to book meetings in the afternoon to make time for that important stuff between the kind of 9 and 11 a.m. Period that I already explained. However, sometimes a meeting was that critical next action to move that big deal forward. And so quite often I would work around the client because I'd have a large number of people I had to schedule in, and it was really challenging because I was managing multiple diaries. I'd have like 5 people from my employer there. I'd have like 5 people from the customer's company. So quite often I had to kind of just plan a meeting when it worked for everyone else, and that was something that I couldn't really batch to my own needs. But just other examples where I use this is in podcasting, I will batch recordings on Monday and Tuesday evenings. So generally, most of my guests are in America, so it makes sense to do that in their kind of morning and afternoon period. And I will actually batch them back to back. I once did 3 interviews back to back, which was a bit intense, but it just means that I can get a lot more done. And because I'm in that mode where I'm doing interviews, I am far more effective than if I were doing interviews haphazardly through the day, which would just interrupt my flow and just not make me very productive overall. Now, some great tools for this. So if you're looking for an excellent tool to batch meetings and to automate meeting bookings and sync time zones and things like that, there's a tool called Schedule Once, which I use. And there's also a tool called doodle.com, which is really good if you're trying to schedule with multiple people. So you can just literally, it's a free software, free browser-based software, and you can literally just send the link to your participants, and you can have them tick times when they're available. And then you can find the time that they're all going to be available. So you can use that, and I think that's quite fair to use that in a corporate setting. I also used it for booking a recent roundtable with Ryan Hall and Drew Bay and Skylar Tanner. I had them all fill out a doodle, which made things much, much easier. I also batch dry clean shirts. So as I was alluding to earlier, I had a closet. I don't even know if this is that interesting to you guys, but I'm going to say it anyway. I had a closet in the a wardrobe in the office that was actually kind of supposed to be for customers and other staff. And I pretty much hung all of my shirts in there, and I had a big bag. So I would wait till I got that bag of dirty shirts to a critical mass, and then I would take it to the local dry cleaners. And this actually, it might sound trivial or not important, but this stuff really is part of the makeup. It's part of the eliminating the decision fatigue and being efficient at some of these activities that you have to do. Obviously, I want to have clean shirts on my body every day. So I would take them all down to a local dry cleaner, and I would pick them up the following day, and then have all of my shirts ready and ironed and just ready to go. So, okay, now I'm going to go on to some tips, things that I did that made me more productive in terms of the way I responded to email and answered phone calls and stuff like that, which I think you will find useful. So I never answered unrecognized numbers. I let them go to voicemail, and what I will do is immediately listen to the voicemail to gauge the importance. So if it's not important, obviously I'll just delete it or even block the number. But if it is important, then I'll call them straight back. I had a default response when people called me to try and eliminate small talk. So instead of saying like, "Hey, how's it going?" and having a big long conversation, I'll usually say, "How can I help you? I'm in the middle of something," or "I'm a bit busy. I've got a minute. What's up? How can I help?" Just trying to get straight to the point. I find that senior execs do that automatically. They're busy people. They appreciate that time is a finite resource, and they've got a lot of stuff to do. That I didn't even need to do that, but with some people you do need to do that. I think it's important to steer people toward email where possible. And so if people do have questions they want to ask you, like internal questions, for example, steer people to email. And if you can't get them to do that, then steer them to a phone call. And if you can't do that, then in-person meetings. I think internal meetings are some of the most unproductive things imaginable. And so I think trying to filter information in that order is the best way to go about it. And if someone does request a meeting, as I said, defer them to email, then phone. And you can cite immediate pending work tasks as a reason. So if they say, I want to have a meeting about X, then you can say, oh, well, I've got to achieve X, Y, and Z by this date. Please can you send me an email? And then if they say no, you can say, okay, can we have a call, and so on. So that's I think the best way to handle those types of interruptions. And when responding on email, get into the habit of using if and then. And this is something I think is excellent, and I use it all the time. I use it now. So if I say to someone, if I've got a request or I'm answering a question or I'm trying to schedule something, I'll say, how about this? Okay, and if this doesn't work, please suggest this, this, and this. And it just avoids the back and forth you get on email. So many people are so lazy on email, they don't think about this stuff. And it just creates a lot of back and forth, and things take longer to get done, essentially. So, for example, if we're trying to book a meeting with someone, I won't just say, hi, yeah, are you available on this date? I'll normally give them 3 dates. I'll look through my calendar, I'll give them 3 dates and say, are you available on any one of these dates, these times? If not, please suggest 3 alternatives. And I find most of the time, people will respond well to that and give you the information you need, and you will both be much more productive as a result. So when scheduling meetings, in the future, meetings should only take place to make decisions about a predefined situation, not to define the problem. Ask the person setting the meeting to provide an email with the agenda and to define the purpose. So you can use a line like this: that sounds doable, so I can best prepare. Can you please send me an email with an agenda? That is the topics and questions we'll need to address. That would be great. Thanks in advance. So I've used that, and that's really good because sometimes they will give you an agenda and the purpose of the meeting, and then you will actually be able to resolve it in the email or on a phone call, and you won't even need the meeting in the first place. That's what I've found in experience. Now, an excellent way to avoid interruption is to wear headphones. Now, I started doing this, and I noticed a number of people started doing this in the office, which was quite amusing because it works really, really well. So if you've got headphones in, number one, people are going to be much less likely to interrupt you. And secondly, you can pretend to be on a phone call. So if someone comes up to you, you can just say, hold on a second, as if you're on a phone call, and then look at them and say yes. And that will mean they'll give you a speedier request, or they might not. They might just, leave you alone and come back to you another time. So I think that's an excellent strategy to avoiding interruptions. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about client meetings, and then I'm going to touch on some other concepts as well. So I found, for me, the most productive way to take notes during a meeting was using Evernote. Now, I know some people have an issue with this because they don't want to be seen in a meeting of a client of a laptop, and then they have this kind of like barrier between them and the client, and the client might think that they're typing emails or doing something unrelated to the meeting. So you may want to just say to them, I'm just going to take some notes on my laptop, hope that's okay. So that's what I did. And I think it's great because if you use something like Evernote, you can write all the notes in there. And you can then, if you have a CRM, you can just copy and paste those notes straight into the CRM. So there's no duplication. And the great thing about Evernote is it's indexable. So indexable, is that a word? Well, it is now. So if in the future you need to search something about a specific client or something like that, you can just type the word in the search and it will find the note. So that's really was useful for me. And still useful for me. I use Evernote for everything, even now. I'm using it right now, in fact, whilst I use pointers to help me produce this. And if you do take notes, and I take plenty of notes, when I go to meetups or when I network, I take typically a small Moleskine. I will just take shorthand notes. I used to be terrible at taking notes. I used to try and almost write down every word the person said. And I realized that this was really bad because it actually made it harder to try and capture everything they said, and it wasn't great for the person I was talking to or meeting with either. So I've got much better at shorthand notes, just trying to take the odd word or key fact, which is really powerful because the brain only has to sometimes see a single word to remember the entire context. So if I were doing a call or a client meeting via a call, and in fact in face-to-face, as I've alluded to earlier, I'd always have an agenda and objectives, things that I wanted to achieve from the call or meeting. And if it were a call, I would always use earbuds and I'd walk around. A lot of people that are in sales probably remember the saying that motion creates emotion, which is really corny. But I sometimes felt like when I was standing and moving around that my communication was far more effective and I was just more into it. And the other thing as well is I didn't want to be sat down at my desk all day. So by having earbuds and a mic built in, it was great because it just means that you can walk around and get a bit of more movement into your day. I'm going to touch on delegation. So delegation is really, really important. If you have the luxury, obviously some companies won't give you the resource to delegate certain tasks, but more often than not, we are, as salespeople, inundated with tasks that just aren't our responsibility, either because it's not, we're not within our remit, but actually we are not the best person to deal with that. So I always delegated stuff that wasn't applicable to me, but was important to my clients. So if a client had like a finance inquiry or an inquiry about a delivery of a product or something like that, I would always delegate it to the appropriate department. A lot of where salespeople struggle, and I think the salespeople that are less successful are the ones that get bogged down in trying to handle these requests themselves. And I get where that comes from. It's because they're trying to provide excellent customer service and trying to fix all their customers' problems. But in reality, a business can't scale very well like that. I think, that's why you hire all these different disciplines so that they can take the load of the salesperson. So the salesperson can focus on what they're hired for, which is selling services. And customers aren't going to be irritated by this so long as those other departments can handle those inquiries really effectively. It's when they don't, when it becomes a problem. So I think there's a bit of debate because I know a lot of salespeople still think, and customers will say, oh no, I want the salesperson to do everything for me. But it really depends on how the team on the supplier side works together to respond to that inquiry. So I would pretty much delegate everything I could, in fact. And I was fortunate enough that my employer had a sales support department that would help with a lot of the smaller opportunities and a lot of the sales administration work. So where possible, I would delegate all of that stuff to that team. And I would use like different lists to track that. So I used a waiting for list, which is again getting things done parlance, which was basically a list where I would have outcome dash action and who's it with and when they're going to complete it by. It's just a very, very simple list of the tasks and the actions and who they're with and completion date that I could then use to track. And I would basically process that once a day, normally like I would if I was batching email or my in tray or something like that. And the other important thing I think to do when delegating stuff is learning to empower and trust your teams and the people around you. I think that's really important. And it's something that, I mentioned at the beginning of this, Tim Ferriss empowered his staff to make decisions for him. So if a customer had an issue, he would if it didn't cost more than, say, he had like a threshold. So if it didn't cost more than $100 to fix, he would allow the contractor to spend up to $100 to fix that issue. And I think he moved that up over time. depending on, what the losses were or the impact it had on his business and overall productivity. But this is great because when you empower most people, they do rise to the level and they raise their standard and actually become more confident. And it can work really well. It can backfire if the person you're empowering is really incompetent, but I guess that's more of a hiring issue. But more often than not, empowering your people to make decisions for you is a really, really effective way to improve your productivity. Right, checklists. So you want to create checklists, and I did a podcast on this, which I'll link to go into more detail, for every process within your role or business. So every repetitive process, So for instance, in IT sales, there will inevitably be a customer cancellation policy or process, a process for ordering a new service. There'll be a whole load of internal processes like expenses. And if you can create checklists for these processes rather than relying on some process that was sent over via email about 3 years ago, which is lost in your archive somewhere, then it will dramatically reduce your error and increase your productivity, make you more efficient at doing those tasks. So do keep checklists. I use Evernote to store all my checklists. I had loads when I worked for my previous employer, and people would always say to me, "Oh, Lawrence, how do I do that again? Or how do I process that?" And I would just say to them, "Keep a damn checklist and stop asking me questions." But yeah, and I use them a lot also, as I said in the podcast. So I have a checklist for everything I do. I have a checklist for the introduction for this podcast. I have checklists for marketing that I do after episodes go live. I have a checklist for pre-interview to make sure that I'm well prepared, and the list goes on. Excuse the pun. So next thing I want to talk about, which is also really important, is just in case versus just in time information consumption. So whenever faced with a piece of information, look at it and ask yourself, will I use this info soon for something immediate or important? If no, don't consume it. I suppose this is only really, mainly specific to your business and job where it doesn't really make sense to consume information that you're not going to use. Obviously, there is other information that you might want to consume for recreation. That's different. However, in this context, info is useless if it is not applied because you'll forget it before you have the chance to apply it. So you want to employ just in time, not just in case. You only want to consume information as and when you need it. I used to prep for meetings and things within the workplace well ahead of time, and it was just a complete waste of time because I would forget most of what I learned. So I kind of stopped doing that, and I started only really learning about things within the job as and when I needed them. So this is why, things like training sessions can be really pointless because you'll forget the information before it has to be applied, and it's just not a good use of your time. So I mean, for instance, I would have meetings of clients about a specific product set, and I would know very, very little about that product set till probably the morning before the meeting or the day before, where I would schedule some time to really, really skill up in that area. And as a result of that, I was actually more knowledgeable than if I had done a training session on it 6 months before, because the information would be fresh and it would be up to date. So again, follow your critical to-dos and fill in the gaps as you go. Now, I've said all of this, and I hope that it's been helpful. I hope that you could take these principles and apply them into your job and business for better results. But I just want to say, it doesn't always go smoothly. There are going to be days where emergencies happen. You can't always predict those. If you're working for a company, there are going to be lots of inefficiencies. There are going to be people that stand in your way and the business that gets in your way, customer issues, stuff like that. And my kind of philosophy is, control what you can and accept what you can't. I think if it really bothers you, then if the inefficiencies or the things that are kind of blocking you from being more productive are really bothering you, then you've got to make a decision. Either you have to accept it which probably isn't the right decision if it really bothers you, or you've got to leave and join a new business with the same values, or start your own business where you can control your time. So those are the key things from a productivity perspective. I hope they were helpful to you, and I hope that you can implement them in your job and business with a lot of success. I will close with, I think it's also really, really important to work on your own mindset and become, if possible, a more optimistic person. I think by being very optimistic, you are, and as airy-fairy as this sounds, you're helping that whole law of attraction take place, and you're attracting good opportunities and good people who want to support you. I feel like during my early part of my career at Node 4, for example, I had that attitude, and as a result, I got support from some of the best people in the business. And, some of those guys include Steve Denby and Shane Dove. And there were many great people, some of the best people I've ever worked with in various disciplines within the business and that I've worked with in the IT industry. And I was very fortunate to have them by my side. And we were very formidable in terms of going to market and selling new services and bringing on new customers. And I don't think I would have had that unless I had the right attitude. So I do think a lot of this stuff, all this kind of tactical stuff that I've discussed, stems from having the right attitude. So it's worth bearing that in mind. And a few quotes to leave you with: whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. That's from Mark Twain. One does not accumulate, but eliminate. It is not daily increase, but daily decrease. The height of cultivation always runs to simplicity. Bruce Lee. So that's it, guys. I hope you found it useful. For all the show notes, links, and resources for this episode and all of my episodes, please go to corporatewarrior.org. And until next time, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that. Before you head off, head on over to corpwarrior.com to get your free ebook with 6 interview transcripts of some of my top guests, including Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, and Bill DeSimone, on how to optimize muscle gain, fat loss, and overall health in an efficient, effective, and sustainable way. These transcripts are not verbatim, deliberately. Instead, they've been transcribed in an easy read format to make it more enjoyable and easier for you to quickly pick out what you need and start getting results. To get your ebook, head on over to corpwarrior.com, that's CORP warrior.com, and enter your email address. Then check your email for an email from me with a confirmation link. Once you click the link, you will be instantly redirected to a PDF version of the transcripts. This episode is brought to you by Exercise Science LLC, your one-stop shop for all of your exercise needs. Exercise Science, a high-intensity strength training studio based out of New Orleans, is owned and run by exercise physiologist and Body by Science contributor Ryan Hall. Ryan has been featured on a podcast twice, and both are among my most popular episodes of all time. Exercise Science LLC have the expertise, experience, and the tools to maximize physical strength, improve performance, and functional capacity in just 12 minutes per session. I'm a big fan of Ryan, and if I were living in New Orleans, I would seriously sign up in a heartbeat. To book a consultation, go to corporatewarrior.co/Ryan and submit your information on the contact form. So again, head on over to corporatewarrior.co/Ryan and fill in the contact form to book a consultation now. This podcast is brought to you by HitUni.com. HitUni.com are a provider of amazing online courses for high-intensity training qualifications. HitUni comes highly recommended by the best in the field, including Body by Science co-author Dr. Doug McGuff, Discover Strength CEO Luke Carlson, and trainer and founder of Bay.com, Drew Bay. It was founded by my friend, author, and longtime personal trainer Simon Shawcross, who's also been a guest on the podcast. Simon has 15 years experience training clients and has supervised over 15,000 high-intensity training workouts. Using knowledge from experts like Skylar Tanner, Dr. James Steele, Dr. Ellington Darden, HitUni is a goldmine for learning everything to do with high-intensity training. The courses are delivered online through the website, where you can learn via a variety of multimedia materials at your own pace. There's online support and a discussion forum where you can share ideas and ask for help. To learn more about high intensity training and improve my own results, I started their personal trainer course. The content is amazing, the courses are really easy to follow, and each section is organised into bite-sized chunks that give you a real sense of achievement after you complete each one. I should also mention there is a DIY course, so this is the course for you if you're not necessarily a personal trainer, but you want to learn more about high intensity training and how to implement it for maximum benefit in your own exercise regime. To get your exclusive Corporate Warrior 10% discount on any course you purchase, simply head on over to hituni.com, that's hituni.com, and enter the coupon code CW10, that's CW and the number 10. So again, head on over to hituni.com, pick your course and enter the coupon code CW10 for 10% discount. Thank you for your support.